Before we get too far into it, we are recording now. Let me get you to say and spell your first and last name and give me your title.
My name is Patrick, Patrick, Flavin, Flavin, and I am an associate professor of political science at Baylor University.
Dr. Flavin?
Yes.
Okay. I'm glad you had you say it back home in Louisiana. That would be Flavin. So.
Yeah, it depends on where you are in the country, I think, how people pronounce it. So I don't take offense when people.
If I slip up, my apologies.
You wouldn't be the first. Don't worry.
All right, Dr. Flavin from Baylor University, thank you for joining us. We're talking about the death of basically iconic Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's been on the Supreme Court for quite some time. She became quite popular amongst her peers in government and even in social circles as well. She was an iconic figure, and her death is kind of setting the stage for a political fight, the likes of which we haven't seen in a while. It could get pretty nasty, so maybe kind of set the stage for us and explain why this has the potential to shape up to be a kind of a vicious battle.
So this is already a contentious election season. We're only a little more than a month away from the presidential election. So things were already politically contentious, and this, I think, will only add to the stakes and to the contentiousness of the fight. So in the Democrats' eyes, the 2016 vacancy of Antonin Scalia's Supreme Court seat, and then their attempt to fill it with Merrick Garland in the Republican-controlled Senate, not taking up President Obama's appointment, is still fresh in their minds. And so there's been all sorts of accusations of hypocrisy and of applying one standard then compared to another standard now. So it'd be hard to, the best way to put it, it'd be hard to think of a scenario that would create more political conflict at this point. This is probably one of the, it's hard to compare to anything recent that
right.
Approximates this.
You mentioned how the Democrats have, started saying this is hypocrisy at its finest, and you mentioned the Merrick Garland situation. The two situations are a little different, correct? It's not the same exact situation, if I'm recalling correct.
Yeah, so Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is making the argument that the difference between 2016 and today is that in 2016 you had a Democratic president and a Republican Senate. And so his argument then was let the voters weigh in and then wait till after the presidential election to make any sort of decision or appointment. Now in 2020, we have a Republican president and a Republican-controlled Senate. And so Mitch McConnell's argument has been that in the 2018 elections, the midterm elections, the Republicans maintained their Senate majority, and therefore this situation is different than the 2016 situation.
So basically, President Obama didn't have the vote in the Senate to get his nominee through, and President Trump does. The Republicans hold the White House and the Senate, so that's how the situation is different.
Yes, and from a just very practical standpoint, that the best way to put it is President Obama didn't have the support of the Senate because he faced the opposition party, whereas President Trump doesn't have that problem. And so from just a pragmatic point of view, the Republican Senate has already signaled that they're going to confirm whoever President Trump nominates.
So really quickly, just a final point on that, and then I want to move on. That's not, and you see this on both sides all the time, you see either side who maybe has the losing argument leave details like that out when they're making their case. Do you think that maybe adds to some of the anger in society when they don't have all of the news? Because at first at first glance, that's hypocrisy. That is something to be mad over.
Yeah, I think if you go back to Mitch McConnell's statements in 2016, um, the which party controls the Senate part of the argument was often left out. So he did make that claim, but it wasn't sort of what you usually heard. So usually you just heard that the Senate wasn't going to take up a nomination in the year of a presidential election, and then sort of added on sometimes, but not always, was this other part about who controlled the Senate. So I think, of course, depending on which side you're arguing from today, you'll sort of point to that context, whether it was left out or not. And so I certainly think it adds some at least nuance to the discussion about is today different than 2016.
Expanding out a little bit, we didn't see, and I don't anticipate it'll be the same, but with Justice Neil Gorsuch, we didn't see a huge backlash over this. Kavanaugh was a very nasty fight. Why is this fight? Why are people coming out saying this is going to be huge?
So the main reason why this is probably going to be an even more contentious political fight than President Trump's previous two nominations is that this has the potential to change the ideological makeup of the court. So Justice Ginsburg was a reliable liberal voter in most cases, came before the Supreme Court. President Trump signaled his intention to fill the seat with someone with a more conservative judicial philosophy. So it's one thing when you're sort of replacing a conservative justice with another conservative justice. It's something very different, and I think ratchets up the political conflict when you're changing potentially the ideological balance of the court.
So let's paint a picture. We've got COVID-19. People are stuck in their homes. We've got people peaceful protesting and looting and rioting. We've got claims of racial injustice on the police force. We've got a very, as you say, contentious presidential election, and you add this on top of it. Is this going to put a strain on the election and our country as a whole? Does it have the potential to do that?
It does in potentially really two ways. So first, from just a campaigning standpoint, I think it remains to be seen, is this going to benefit one side or the other? I think you could make arguments that it could benefit President Trump's campaign, but you could make arguments that it would benefit Vice President Biden's campaign as well. So I think I'm going to hold out judgment on what the political effects are going to be, and we'll sort of have to see those play out. Maybe more importantly, in a practical sense, because of the unprecedented nature of this election, where you're going to have more people voting by mail, decisions that are going to have to be made likely by the courts in terms of which ballots are going to be counted, what the deadline is going to be for ballots. If that Supreme Court seat is vacant and remains vacant through the election, then you could potentially have a court that's evenly divided, and you have a series of 4-4 decisions. And so that's at least arguments that, so for example, Senator Ted Cruz here in Texas has made the argument that we should have a full 9 members on the Supreme Court because it's likely that the Supreme Court in some way, shape, or form is going to have to make rulings on how ballots are counted, what deadlines are applied, and things like that. So I think that's probably the most practical effect of this, is that the court, whether we like it or not, is likely going to play a role in the 2020 presidential election.
What would be your message to the voters, the people who follow politics, and the people who maybe treat politics as a spectator sport? What's about to happen? What are we going to see?
So I think one term to become familiar with is what political scientists call constitutional hardball. And so our Constitution, of course, sets out parameters that are fairly basic or limited in nature. So, for example, the president can nominate a Supreme Court justice, and the Senate can confirm a Supreme Court justice. There's of course nothing in there about whether a Supreme Court justice can be appointed or confirmed in an election year. Those are sort of arguments that have been made after the fact. And so a lot of what we do in this country politically rests on established norms. And so certainly in 2016, not taking up President Obama's appointment could be considered a form of constitutional hardball. That is, sticking to the Constitution as it is written, but maybe not so much the norms that have been established. And so that's where discussions of adding Supreme Court justices, if Democrats were to win the presidency and take the Senate, eliminating the filibuster, those types of actions would be certainly within the rules of the Constitution. They would alter sort of established norms. And so this idea of playing hardball, stretching the Constitution as far as it will let you go, I think, unfortunately, in my view, we're likely to see a whole lot more of in the near future.
At the end of this, however it plays out, do you think this will end up with Americans being just so totally over politics, or just have the mindset of another day in the United States of America?
I don't know. It seems like that this is probably one of the few events that is a Supreme Court vacancy this close to the election that can actually add to the political conflict or political contentiousness in the United States. So I think that's a real concern. I think it's a concern for how citizens view government, how they view politicians, and maybe most specifically how citizens view the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court and the justices currently on the court need to be very mindful of how the court is viewed in terms of its legitimacy, in terms of how the public views the court, because one thing that the court enjoys that the other two branches of government don't is that it's viewed for the most part as non-political, as sort of above the political fray. This could very much put that view to the test and possibly put it in danger. So I think that's something to keep an eye on going forward.
I've heard a few people talk about on the Democratic side options as far as maybe stacking the court, adding more justices, or adding more people to the Senate, by adding in Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico. And then you hear Justice Ginsburg weigh in on these very issues that have been brought up before. She felt 9 members on the Supreme Court was enough. How do Democrats argue around that?
Yeah, I think it would be maybe sort of a selective application of Justice Ginsburg's wishes. So one argument being made right now is that she explicitly made the request that the future that she wouldn't want her seat filled until a new president is installed. Of course, a justice can make that request. It's not the Senate and the president are certainly under no obligation to honor that request. But I think Democrats could potentially be put in a tough spot, or at least accused of sort of selectively applying the wishes of Justice Ginsburg, because I think it comes back to this idea that, especially among those who follow the Supreme Court and the justices themselves, is that they always have an eye towards the legitimacy and trust in the institution of the Supreme Court, and say altering the number of seats on the Supreme Court would be, well, constitutional, certainly, a change from established norms. We've had 9 justices for years and years and years, and so changing that would be a major. It would be a perfect example of this constitutional hardball that I think could only add to the political divisiveness in the country.
So far from both sides, I've heard 2 of the issues I believe that could be driving this decision to fill or not to fill: abortion, or Roe v. Wade, and healthcare in the United States. Do you feel like those are the 2 big driving forces between why each side wants to have their side prevail?
I think on abortion rights, on healthcare, certainly on gay rights as well. replacing Justice Ginsburg, a liberal vote on the Supreme Court, with a conservative vote would probably alter how the court rules in future cases when it comes to, say, religious liberty as well. In the short term, I think the Biden campaign has probably made a smart decision to focus on the healthcare question, and that is there is a case that the Supreme Court's going to hear that if it was sort of carried to its full conclusion, could invalidate the Affordable Care Act, and that would throw into question those that have, say, pre-existing conditions, whether they could afford health insurance or not. So I think in the near term, that's probably the most important issue. And I think for all the sometimes abstract legal issues the court grapples with, that's one that's very concrete in people's minds. I think it makes sense on the Biden campaign's part to emphasize that as they're sort of laying out what the stakes are in the upcoming election.
So my wife, when I saw the news break that she had passed away, one, it was a sad moment because she was so loved in her community, and she was such an icon and such a trailblazer for women in the legal realm. But I got nervous and I began to shake because I knew the ramifications behind her death and what each side was going to want to do or not do. What do you say to the people who are just worried to death that this could rip our country apart?
Yeah, I think so. One story that's received a lot of attention in the wake of Justice Ginsburg's passing is that she was, by all accounts, a genuine friend of Antonin Scalia, who was an ideological opposite. But what I think is important in those stories is not just that they were friends and they held different views, but they honestly and faithfully respected each other's views. And so I think, given the political divisiveness right now, that could be a potential model for, yes, people believe different things politically. Yes, they support different policies. Yes, they might have different sort of values backing those up. But to really respect and identify that just because someone doesn't share the same opinions, values, ideology as you, that they're still worthwhile having as a friend. They're still worth listening to. I think that might be one potential lesson to take from Justice Ginsburg's passing.
Make a very good point. While both sides are arguing about the Supreme Court and the power that it holds, two of the titans on that court got along really well despite their differences. And maybe they could be kind of the teachers for all of us as we fight about filling their seats.
I think so. And I think so. Vice President Biden, at least so far, and things of course could change, but so far at least, I think has sort of resisted calls from more liberal members of the Democratic Party to make a commitment now to pack the Supreme Court or to add seats to the Senate or something like that. So I think it's so far at least he's done a fairly good job at trying to de-escalate or take the temperature down. And I think, ultimately, I think that would benefit everyone. Yes, it is extremely important. It's going to shape policy, but at the same time, maybe de-escalating, honestly looking at what the other side has to say, and even if one doesn't agree with it, at least listening and respecting it. I think that could go a long way. It might be wishful thinking, but I think it is. The alternative is just to continue barreling towards sort of two different views of the country and political divisiveness. And I don't think that's a good thing for the country.
Dr. Flavin, thank you so much for joining us and kind of shedding new light and breaking down this very multifaceted issue that is before us now. So we appreciate it.
Yes, happy to join you. Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too.